Hello there, and welcome to another video. Today, we're going to do a different type of video. This is not a build video or mechanics related. This is a video about role play. The shard I play on, REGISFALL, is a role play shard. So I figured eventually we would have to talk about that because it's equally, if not more, important than the mechanics. And I have here 5 points I want to talk about related to role play. Um, we are here on my fisherman. We have some SOS we want to get to. This is not a character whose build I've showed here yet, my melee ranger. We will get to that sometime. But I figured if I am just gonna talk about roleplay, what better way to do it than fishing? If I were to be role playing on this character now, I would not be able to record the video. um, Very hard to do two things at the same time that require focus. So fishing doesn't require a lot of focus. I just need to go to the marked location and talk to you guys. So without further ado, let's start. The first point I want to talk about is so point number one, be attached to the story, not the character. And bear with me when I say that there is there is a reason, there is a method to my madness. Let's compare roleplay to a book because at the end of the day, a game or a role playing game is just a way of telling a story, right? It's a story developing on the screen, and we, as the characters in that story, are living it. So it's very much comparable to a book, I would say. For instance, when you're reading a book, you don't know what's going to happen in the story. You don't know what's going to happen to any character, whether you like the character or not. Sometimes you don't like a character and they win or they gain something that you think they shouldn't. Sometimes you like character a lot and they fail somehow or they die or something bad happens to them. And what do you do? Do you put the book away when something like that happens that you don't like? No, you continue reading because you're invested in the story of the book much more than just a single character. And I think the same concept should apply to a game, to a role playing game. Be invested in the story of the game and the development of that story. Of course, you you want to develop your character and their story, but you have to be aware that that story and that character are part of something much larger than themselves, which is the story of the world, the story of REGISFALL. And that's what, in my opinion, you should be attached to. Using myself as an example, I've so far killed two characters. My first character, when I returned the shard, which was a necromancer, I think some of you might know who he was. And most recently, um, another character which was involved in a sort of revolution story arc. I knew from the get go that both of them were going to die because they, for different reasons, but they became villains in their own way. And being that REGISFALL is a fantasy setting, I expect villains to lose at some point. So I was ready for them to die. And to be honest, they could only die if I wanted to, because permadeath is not something, it's not something that we have mechanically here. Characters can be resurrected ad eternum. But how does that serve the plot? How does that serve the story if those villains just kept coming back over and over and over? Short answer is it doesn't. So I do believe the story was much better served with those characters dying. And because I was attached to the story and not the characters, I could go through that without shedding any tears. Of course, I liked the characters, I invested time into them, but hey, characters die. Story arcs reach their end. This is true for any book, and in my opinion, it should be also true for a game like this, where you are building stories collectively through role play. So, this is my first, let's say, tip for you. Don't be attached to your characters, be attached to the story. Because when you're attached to the story, it doesn't matter if your character dies or if something less consequential happens to them, like something bad happens to them, or they fail in a mission. Anything unfavorable. It doesn't matter if that happens because it's part of the story, and you're going to play around it. You're going to develop your character around the bad thing that happened wherever it was, right? And as long as you tell yourself that it's serving a greater goal, that being to feel this story, to write this story, then it's all good. There is nothing lost in this aspect. You're writing a book with other people, and there's no good or bad in that. There's only a story. So that's the first tip, guys. Focus on the plot, focus on the narrative, the story. Don't get attached to the character. Sometimes it's easily to mistake the in-game world with the out-of-character world and take things personally when they are really just happening in the story. And I think a good way to avoid it is if we focus on the story instead of the character. So, with that said, let's move on to number two, which has some connections to point number one. Because this is a role play game, we are not the only character in it. This is not a single player game. So when we say that this is not a single player game, like this is a multiplayer game online, there are several other characters other than my own playing and engaging with the story here. So this is to say there are no main characters. There is no plot armor for anyone, The story doesn't serve this or that character. The story serves only itself. So realizing this isn't a single player game, the sooner the better. Because when we play a single player game, we are often used to being the hero, to being the savior, to being the person who will fix the problems, who will save the world, etc., etc. This is not the case for a role playing game because sometimes you might be that person. You might be the one who will find the solution or who will defeat the evil monster. But sometimes it will be someone else. And realizing that is integral to building a good story. Because imagine if you were to read a book and everything that happens in that book, all of the feats of courage or evil deeds were done by the very same person. It would be a very boring story, wouldn't it? So let's use the most famous fantasy setting as example, The Lord of the Rings. In The Lord of the Rings, we have a central villain, which is Sauron. But during the story, he's definitely not the only one doing all the evil things. You have the orcs, you have Saruman, etc., etc. There are many characters in that story. Not even the main villain is by himself. Likewise, you have several characters in the Fellowship of the Ring, and each of them play a role. Even though Frodo is the main character, he is by far not the most brave or the most skilled in combat. He is, I think, Frodo's main characteristic is his persistent, right? And his loyalty, and eventually he does develop courage, which is his character arc, but you get what I'm trying to say. Which is that no one in a setting like this is the main character, because this is not a single player game. This is much like a book in which the focus of the story shifts from one character to another. And I believe this is very true for a role playing game like REGISFALL. So it kind of demands some exercise in courtesy from the players to realize when it's time to just shut the fuck up and let others take the spotlight. This is something you can do willingly and purposefully during a scene. For example, let's say you know a character is very good at doing a thing. You know, I don't know, they're skilled in stealth, for example. And you are role playing a scene where you are exploring a dungeon. Maybe that character, maybe that player doesn't take a lot of initiative, but you do, and you want to see them, you know, feeling good about their character, feeling their character was useful in a given situation. So you can be like, hey, I know there are some dangers ahead, and if we just run in, we might be in trouble. Why don't you scout ahead for us? And suddenly, that character will feel he played a role, that he was useful, and that for a moment in that paragraph of the story, he was important. And I feel like it's very nice to feel that way when you're playing a game like this, when you're building a story together with others. because you feel like you belong, you feel engaged, you feel you are part of that story. And remember, we're building that story together. So ideally, oh, we found a mastery. Nice. So ideally, um, you want to involve others in that story because you are not playing this together. You are not the single player of this game. So involving others in the story is good. Ideally, everyone should be doing that because it's a living world, and our characters are not the center of that world. We're just a part of it. And there will be moments for us to shine, and there will be moments to share that spotlight with others. And realizing you're not the main character is also important because sometimes there will be situations where, like we said on the first point, there will be situations where things are not favorable to you and you just have to deal with them. You can't take it personally because it's nothing against you or your character. It's just how the story developed, right? And at those moments, I know it can feel frustrating, but you just have to realize, hey, this is nothing against me or my character. This is serving the story. So I'm going to be attached to this character. I have other characters. This is just a part of this story. And at this moment, I am sharing the story with someone else. And maybe what that someone else did wasn't super favorable towards my character. That doesn't mean that person is going out of their way to punish me or to harass me. Oh, remember, it's just a part of the story. And conflict is a part of the story as well, but we'll get to that on point number 4. The main point I wanted to get across here was that we are not the main character because there are no main characters. Some characters might be more important than others in certain situations. They might take, let's say, a main role in that story, but that's temporary and that shifts from plot to plot, from narrative to narrative. As I said, it's a living world and it exists because of us, because of all of us collectively writing this story. So keep that in mind, folks. There are no main characters in REGISFALL. There may be main characters in certain story arcs, right? But that's temporary. Don't get attached to that. Get attached to the story. And moving on to point number 3 now. Sometimes you, or I should say, more often than not, as I said, you want to let others shine. You want to have a more reactionary behavior. If you see others taking initiative and doing something, creating a story, creating a role play scene, you can be reactionary and let it play out. But more often than not, I should say, we want to be initiators, not reactionary. And what do I mean about being initiators? For example, let's say you want, very simple example, you want to go on a hunt, right? And you want to do so as a group. You don't want to go hunting on your own, of course. This is not a single player game. Playing in a group is a lot more fun, unless you are fishing out in the ocean, which can be a little boring. But Um, Events is what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking only about scheduled events. I'm talking about impromptu events as well that can happen just as simply as going into Discord and being like, hey folks, I want to go on a hunt. Who wants to come along? By doing something as simple as that, you are initiating something. You are initiating a story. Even if it's just something as simple as a hunt, some dungeon delving, I mean, who doesn't like that? Because you can role play during that dungeon. Maybe you will run into other characters there. Maybe you will work together, or maybe you will work against one another. We don't know. It's a sandbox game. Anything can happen. But it's more likely for a thing to happen if we initiate it instead of waiting for it to happen. Be a little ambitious about your character and about the way he engages with the world and other characters. Don't wait for things to happen if nothing is happening. Take initiative. Initiate them yourself. Be an initiator. And this the scope for this is quite large. It can be for simple things such as hunts or a tavern night. Like, hey guys, I'm going to the tavern right now. If anyone wants to come along to role play, I will be there. And some people might come. Maybe no one will. It happens, but hey, you tried. You tried to initiate something. And I think that the joy you will receive from when these are successful events will be much greater than the maybe 10, 15 minutes you spent there waiting and nobody showed up. Because this can happen. I've run many events where people didn't show up. And this, I agree, can be unmotivating. But sometimes you just have to push through, you know, and have faith in the story you want to create. Because slowly but surely, people do start coming. Um, I really like running events now and then, and I really like to see other players taking that initiative as well. And if I'm available, usually I try to support such initiatives. And that's what I wanted to say to you also. Um, if you're waiting for something to happen and something does happen, try to attend if it makes sense for your character to attend. If he could develop in that kind of event, if he could have an impactful role in that event, or just to be there, because you never know what can happen. Anything can happen. It's a sandbox game where improvisation it is at its core. So having scheduled events is nice because people can prepare. We all have lives and jobs outside of the game, right? But improvisation is also good. So sometimes just announce what you're going to do. Hey guys, I'm gonna hit this dungeon, or hey guys, I am in this city and looking for roleplay. And by doing that, the chances of you running into roleplay is much greater than if you said nothing and just waited for something to happen. So this is tip number 3. Don't be reactionary unless you have to. And you have to be reactionary sometimes to let others take the spotlight, as we said on point number 2. But most of the times you want to be an initiator and start things, initiate things. This will be healthy just for your enjoyment of the game and your experience and everyone else's, right? because it's a community game. So ideally, everyone should strive to be an initiator now and then. And when you just wait for things to happen, chances are you're missing out on opportunities to create stories with others when you can just initiate those things yourself. So try it. It can be a lot of fun. I love running events. And sometimes I will just walk around town and see what happens. Sometimes I will schedule an event. Sometimes I will attend someone else's event and I will try to be really engaged with it, and really try to participate it, being reactionary in that I'm responding to someone else's event and trying to make that person shines the most if I can. I think that makes sense, right? Because going back to point number one, we're writing the story together. So sometimes you want to take the pen in your hand and write a paragraph. Sometimes all you want to do is read someone else's paragraph by using our book comparison, if that makes sense. Okay, let me drink some water. So try to be an initiator if you can, but unless you need to be reactionary in a given situation. Moving on to point number four, and I think this is kind of a polemic one. Conflict is good, and I know the community here is kind of split in mixed feelings about that. Um, but yes, I do think conflict is good to any serious storytelling. There can be no plot without conflict. So, using the Lord of the Rings example, if there was no conflict, if there was no Dark Lord, if there was no ring to be brought into Mordor, if there wasn't an orc army being created, what what would that story be about? Conflict is the bread and butter of narratives, and every good narrative needs conflict. Conflict isn't necessarily something bad happening. It can be tension. It can be I don't know, mistrust, anything. But the main thing about conflict is that clash of interests happen, and this isn't necessarily bringing it back to game terms. This isn't necessarily going to result in PvP. Using being a little liberal about the use of the word, not just PvP mechanically combat, but player versus player, be it like political intrigue, racials, and kingdoms fighting one another. It's not just that. Conflict can be something as simple as we are in a tavern and we are playing dice between our characters, and one of the characters hates losing, and then he loses and he starts acting in an unsavory way, accusing others of cheating the game. This is creating a conflict in that scene that must be resolved somehow. Maybe the other characters will explain to them that they're not cheating, or maybe they will convince him otherwise. They will try to persuade him that the game uh, was not. Oh man, I forgot the word for it, but there was no cheating involved in the game. Or maybe they will double on it, double the bet, and say, "Yes, I was cheating. How did you notice?" And escalate the conflict. Whatever you do, know that you are serving the story, and being attached to the story will make us deal with conflict situations a lot better, especially when we realize we are not the main character in that conflict. We are just a part of it. And when we realize we're not the main character, we don't have to win every conflict situation. We can lose or we can fail something because we are either being initiators or reactionary, right? Sometimes in a conflict situation, you just have to take the L and accept you lost. This example I used of the dice game, in fact, happened in the game with one of my characters, my main character at the moment. We were playing dice in the tavern and we were doing bets, and we bet some gold in a game that I lost three times, if memory serves. And that character of mine, his personality is that he one of the things in one of his traits is that he's a sore loser. He hates losing, especially in games involving bets. So what I described to you was the very thing that happened in the game. He started accusing others of cheating, and the whole situation was not tense. It was very lighthearted. It was very funny, as a matter of fact, because this is kind of a humorous character. I think everyone at the table was enjoying themselves, but there was a clash of interests there. My character didn't want to lose the game, he didn't want to lose his money, and that's exactly what happened. And the people who beat him in the game and who won his money wanted to win the game. They wanted to gain the bets on the table, right? So that's a conflict of interests. And I realized that by accusing them of cheating, anything could happen. Maybe they would take it not so lightly and decide to attack me. I mean, the possibility is there. I am giving them the possibility of reaction, right? When I accused them of something. So, but in doing that, I fully expected some consequence whatsoever to come out of it, and I can't control what that will be because I am not the main character. I am just a part of the story. So I created a conflict scene, and because I did that, the conflict could go either way. It could go against me, it could go in my favor, or it could be resolved in a neutral way, which was what happened in this situation. The characters present were able to convince mine that no cheating was involved, that he just had to accept that he lost the game. And in seeing that, I realized they were initiating role play and trying to convince my character. So I had the choice there. I could double down on the conflict by initiating something else, maybe escalating the conflict, or I could be reactionary and realizing, hey, they're trying to do something here. They're trying to convince my character, and I can just let them convince me. And that's what I choose to do at the scene because we were having so much fun there, and it didn't seem it didn't seem to favor the story or the scene if I were to escalate that, right? Um, it would it would not serve the story, is what I'm trying to say. So I was reactionary to their attempt and let my character be convinced, even though he was a little upset that he lost. Still, I didn't stop playing my character. He was still upset. He was still grumbling and so on, and drinking heavily because he was so mad that he lost, even getting drunk. Right? That's the consequence of the act of the scene. But I could still play my character and accept that he lost in that situation. Let me cite another example of a loss. Um, I used to have a rogue character, a bard. I showcased his build here, and that character, he was hired by another one to hunt down a necromancer that was terrorizing the city. So I tracked down the necromancer and followed him across the map until I got to a crypt with him. He had two skeletal dragons summoned by his side, so I knew if I were to strike him there, there was a risk involved. But I decided that, well, my character was hired to do this. He has an opportunity to do this, and if I strike and I am successful, I win. I just need to get him by surprise and assault him, ambush him. So I stalked him in that crypt, and when I saw an opportunity, I moved in to strike. But as I did, I made a mistake. I walked over one of their skeleton dragons, and that revealed me. Suddenly, the element of surprise is lost. I revealed myself. The necromancer is aware that I'm there. I can't backstab him anymore because his back is no longer turned to me. And the first thing I know, he is teleporting away and sending his dragons to attack me. And I'm just like, uh oh, I fucked it up. He was very effective in his reaction. He was very fast. He threw a net at me, keeping me in place. He commanded the skeletal dragons to attack me and proceeded to cast his spells, and eventually he got me down uh, without me even touching them. And I was like, well, I failed in my mission. What consequence from this should come to my character? This is what I did. It was a conflict of interests there. My character wanted to kill his character. His character wanted to live. The outcome of this conflict of interest was that he managed to live, but he defeated me. He didn't kill me. I could just resurrect if he did, but he only KO'd me and left, which was very courteous of a villain character being attacked by a rogue in a crypt. So when my character got up, I needed to realize how I would proceed with with how the story would resume, because I just lost my attempt on that necromancer. So it would make sense to me if my character were afraid of that necromancer from now on and cautious because that necromancer just proved to be quite powerful indeed and he overpowered me. So the way I decided to roleplay that reactionary was that to accept I lost and roleplay accordingly. So my character went to his contractor, the person who hired him, and he said, "Look, I want I want to cancel the contract. You don't have to pay me. I will give you all the information I got by following that dude, but I'm not going to pursue him anymore. This is too much for me. It's too above my pay grade. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do this job anymore." And he didn't. I felt it was a decent way to give a nod to that necromancer's player in his success in combating me. And I de escalated the conflict by simply leaving him be. I wasn't going to pursue him anymore. He succeeded in averting his assassination attempt and is carrying me away. In doing that, I respect the player's success in ruining my plans. But hey, because I was not attached to my character and to the story forming around it, I didn't feel frustrated at all. It just seemed to me like another chapter in a bigger story, which I happened to be a part of. And in this chapter of the story, my character failed. He didn't succeed, unfortunately, but it happens, right? When you're reading a book, sometimes characters fail in what they're trying to do. Boromir failed to fight the orcs, and the consequence was that he died from that. Because on REGISFALL you can decide when your character faces his final death, I didn't want my character to just die from that encounter, but at the same time, I didn't want him to be an immortal stalker who would just keep pursuing that necromancer forever. There had to be some consequence out of that conflict. And since he won, I decided that the consequence was that I wouldn't pursue him anymore. I think he was owed that. It's just how that story developed. So these are two examples of personal examples in which I lost in a conflict situation. One of them involving roleplay, and the other one involving actual PvP. So now let's look at a situation where I was the initiator for conflict. The most recent one being my warlord character, Magnus Empyrean, and Fall from Grace arc involving his group, the Legion, and himself, in which they launched kind of campaign of terror around the world. And from the very beginning, from the way it started and from how it developed, I knew that it couldn't go on forever. It wouldn't be sustainable. So to create a real sense of fear and risk, I escalated that conflict to its maximum potential. The enemies of that character, if he ran into them, it was usually very tense situations. If they had the PvP tag turned on, which is PvP is optional on REGISFALL. So if they had PvP turned off, I would usually role play with them, make some threats, and send them on their way with a message to continue furthering the story. But if they had PvP turned on, I saw that as an invitation to escalate the conflict. So I did run into such characters in Magnus Travels, um, and more often than not, it resulted in heads being cut off and placed on spikes in front of cities, namely the human and the elven cities, because I wanted to create a feeling of unease in the world, that no one was safe, that there was a real risk in traveling. And I think to some extent I succeeded, but I knew from the very beginning that it would not be sustainable to keep doing that forever. That eventually I would have to accept the loss. I would have to lose eventually, and that character of mine would have to die. And by die here I mean permadeath. He would have to be defeated. He was a villain, and the heroes in a fantasy setting, they have to win. Like, there are no fantasy stories where the villains win. There may be some, but usually, at least what we're most used to in the mainstream is that the heroes win, and this is something I respect a lot. And I wanted to give the heroes that win. That doesn't mean I needed to make it any easier. There was two events out of it, and several random encounters through the world, and the result from that conflict we created, me and my two guildmates, was that um, it created meetings between nations, letters being sent back and forth, meetings inside those nations, plans, people coming up with plans on how to deal with this situation, scouting the land, looking for the criminals, etc., etc., etc. Conflict is good for stories because it creates goals, it creates something for people to talk about, creates something for people to do. And I believe that story arc was successful in this regard. And eventually, it came to a point where the story needed to see an end. And it did. There was a last encounter with the three criminals, Magnus, Somir, and Clyde, where we agreed among ourselves and made it publicly known as well to the players that the moment we died in that conflict, it would be the final death. The characters would not be coming back, and the conflict would reach its resolution. So you see here the dichotomy between being initiator and being reactionary. You have to strike a balance between the two because, ooh, this is a good find, waterlogged lockbox. Because you can't be you can't be drawing the story by yourself and being the sole initiator or playing like you are the main character. You are not. I dare say that in that whole story arc, Magnus, who started it, was not the main character at all. He was, let's say, one of the villains in that story, but the main character were the nations that united to combat this threat, and they succeeded in the end. Does this make sense? So, with this in mind, with the story in mind, and the plot in mind, and all the players involved in mind, you can kind of calibrate when you need to de escalate, when you need to escalate, when you need to instigate conflict, when you need to react to conflict, and so on and so forth. And finding the balance between all of these factors is how you create good stories. But know this, folks, there can be no narrative without conflict. But conflict is not necessarily PvP, as I demonstrated. Um, with my first character, my necromancer, most of the conflict in which he was involved was political intrigue. It happened in letters or meetings and veiled threats. He was for sure a villain, and but the things he did that caused conflict the most were not through PvP. It was through his guile and deception, etc., etc. So conflict at its core is just clash of interests, not necessarily PvP, and not necessarily bad either. Conflict is good. It's the bread and butter of narratives. So don't shy away from it. Don't be afraid of taking risks. Um, don't run away from conflict. You never know where it can take you. It can take you somewhere very nice with the resolution, but if you do take the risk, be ready to accept that you may lose as well. It can happen because you are not the main character. You are part of a bigger story. It's not a single player game, and when you realize it's just a story unfolding, you don't get attached to this or that character or this or that outcome because everything is serving the story, serving to write this book that we are writing collectively. Okay, moving on to the last point, point number 5, and which touches on everything we said before, which is know the constraints of the world and play around them. So um, let me give an example. I think I explain myself better through examples. This world has many bosses, which are villains. They are not just a mob in the world for you to kill and level up and gain artifacts. No, they are actual entities that exist in the world. They have a story, they have a background, they have lore about them, right? So it wouldn't be realistic, for example, if one of your characters had the goal of eliminating one of those threats, because he cannot. The moment you would eliminate that boss from a dungeon, then what happens? Does staff need to create a new one every single time someone defeats a boss? That's just not sustainable for a game world. So, with that in mind, um, having that as a goal is just not tangible. It's not a tangible goal, it's not realistic because you can't mechanically defeat that boss forever. Of course, the staff sometimes run GM run events in which there are villains for us to defeat. Those we can defeat forever because they are NPCs being controlled by GMs. But for example, Igneos is almost a force of nature. He is flame incarnate, and he exists in the Burning Death dungeon as the final boss. You can't possibly have a goal to remove Igneous from the world unless the staff does a plot around that where the end of the story would result in that. But otherwise, it's impossible. You can't have any hope of achieving that goal. So why make that goal your character's goal in the first place? Let me cite a personal example as well. I used to have a paladin who lost his wife and his comrades in battle while fighting Igneous, this very boss. I knew that by making Igneous his nemesis, he would never achieve his revenge. He would never get his revenge because Igneous will keep just spawning back every time someone goes into the burning depths and summons him. So instead of seeing Igneous as a threat that he needs to remove completely, he had two side goals. One of them was defeating Igneous armies, which are the Shadow Clan. He can't do that. He can't kill all the Shadow Clan orcs, not by himself. But this is something he can use to create events, to go there and, assault the Burning Depths and fight Igneous every single time he comes back. So instead of his revenge being something like, I want to defeat Igneous once and for all, it was more along the lines of every time he comes back, I will be there to defeat him. Because this is a tangible goal. This is something that works within the constraints of the game world. Another thing, which was a more of a role play device, was his curse. He was cursed by Igneous. And fixing that curse was also his goal because it was killing him. Eventually, it did succeed and it did kill him. So I guess I do have a third character who was killed. But it was more of a role play development. And so he had reason to hate Igneous, but killing Igneous was not his end goal. He had other goals that revolved around that thirst for revenge, removing his curse, fighting the Shadow Clan orcs, because these were tangible goals. So, in the same vein, this is my fifth tip: play around the constraints of the world. Create stories that are possible, that are tangible. For the things that aren't possible for the player, you can definitely approach staff about helping you with some special effects to a story. I have done so, but usually that should come after the story has already started, after you already initiated something. You can't expect to be reactionary and then tell staff to do all the heavy lifting for you. Start something, be the initiator, and once the story is going and it's involving other players, it's involving other groups, then you know if it's to develop into something bigger, then now would be a good time to maybe ask for staff help. But don't expect them to do everything to you. Start it yourselves. And when you do so, play around the constraints of the game world. Don't start things that you can't feasibly finish or carry on. For example, If your character has the goal of, I don't know, changing, destroying a city, or throwing a nuclear bomb on Jinpal to kill all the undeads in there, well, you can definitely craft nukes in the game. You have explosives which are quite strong and quite with a quite big range. But guess what? If you use that in Jinpal, you won't destroy buildings, you won't destroy the undeads, because the buildings are static. They can't be destroyed. The undeads are spawners. They will come back. So that's not a tangible goal. You can't accomplish that. So why even try is what I'm trying to say, because that's basically setting yourself up for frustration. Don't do that. You will have a lot more enjoyment when your goals and objectives in the game are possible and accomplishable within the constraints of the game world. Remember, this is a role playing shard, but it's still Ultima Online, an old game with a lot of limitations. Sure, it's perfect for role play, in my opinion. There's just so much you can do, right? But it's still Ultima Online, and there's a lot you can't do. However, there are many things you can do as well. So why not play around those? So every time you want to initiate something for yourself, for others, for the story, ask yourselves: Is this possible within the game world? Is this feasible? Is it doable? Because if the answer is no, or if the answer is that it would require map updates, script updates, etc., then perhaps the wiser thing to do here would be to look for another objective or adapt your objective so it can exist and be possible within the constraints of the game world. Does that make sense? Okay, I think I covered all points. I tried to be as thorough as I usually am and explain in depth my the way I view and the way I try to conduct myself when roleplay is involved, with as many examples as I could think of. There is no script here. I usually just start recording and speak uh, what's passing through my mind. But these are 5 points that are very dear to me, and I felt like sharing with our community, and maybe they can be helpful to others as well. So, just as a quick review, point number one: be attached to the story, not the character. Two, there are no main characters. This isn't a single player game. Three, be an initiator, but know when to be reactionary. Four, conflict is good. It creates stories, it creates narratives. And five, play around the constraints of the game world. Don't try to accomplish things you know are impossible. Thank you guys. If you watched until the end, I think this was quite a long video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.